Thomas here for the American Intelligence Media. Now, we just had notice that Rod Rosenstein gave his resignation, and when I got here to the conclave, everybody was, ooh! And I was like, whoa, where did this source come from? So, Thomas, you have anything to say?
Anything with Rat Rosenstein is probably a lie. That's the only thing that I can be assured of.
Yes, well, because, you get excited out there. You hear these news reports, and actually it's what you really want to see happen. But you have to look and see what the source is. So we drilled down, and it didn't take much, and found it comes from a very unreliable site. And you need to put this on your list of places to always question. It's this place called Axios, and I was so disappointed to see places like Breitbart and others always using Axios as a place to go to for their information. When it first came up, because we follow alt media very carefully, and so we know when there are newcomers on, and whenever we see a newcomer, we vet them for a while to make sure that we're sending you to places that generally have good articles. Remember, not every place we send you to will have accurate reports. You've also got to use your noggin and figure it out too. But Axios is definitely unreliable. They will put stories in there that are outright untrue just to stir everybody up. They will not go back and correct it. Their sources are anonymous. So that's what I have to say about that. But so it's not true. Rosenstein and Trump, according to Sarah Sanders, will be meeting on Thursday, but really there's nothing here at this point except for Axios telling another untruthful story. Raises a question because we're doing research right now on a company called Axiom. And Thomas, I would like you to talk to folks today about Axiom and about why the United Kingdom might be very concerned at this point in time that we're connecting Stephen Halper and Christopher Steele.
Hey, on Thursday when Rat Rosenstein talks with Trump, you think he'll be wearing a wire? Now, we do have the inexplicable New York Times article that states 3 sources that told them, which of course I don't believe anything these people say until we actually see evidence. These stories, just like the Kavanaugh story, like the Russian dossier story, like the British spy story, which is absolutely true. We can go into this, but when you mentioned Axios, Axios does what the CIA does. It's called spin, disinformation. It's called getting out in front of the narrative for perception management. So let's look at this. Rosenstein needs to be fired, okay? So what do? They put out the caricature story, which, as you pointed out, they do not retract later, a lie, a spin, to try to get the tail to wag the dog. Why? Because they're trying to put out the worst that they can up front so that later they can just say, oh no, that's already been disproven. You mean your gross exaggeration of it has been disproven, but not the truth of the matter. So were there 302s written by FBI agents after meetings with Rosenstein that said that he wanted to wear a wire, whether it was a joke or not, when he talked to Trump to try to get some dirt on him, or that he went around individually? So the second person in charge of the Department of Justice went around individually to cabinet members and more or less begged them to please consider getting rid of Trump because he's insane. In other words, a cabinet vote where Pence would take his place. Pence would have to sign off on this. And this is what they keep mentioning again and again. Well, that's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. Just like the special counsel is never going to happen. There's no crime. And Trump is not crazy, and Pence would never do that. So what is really going on? This is Dianne Feinstein's. Remember, her husband controls 10% of a company called ISIS Management, which controls Avid, which is what gives Anderson Cooper his words in his mouth. It's what gives the entire mainstream media the words that they say, which they do not verify, they do not check, and it is a monopoly. It is racketeering.
Well, it's propaganda.
Look at the propaganda in the judiciary hearing with Dianne Feinstein. She comes with the letter in her hand that she will not show anyone at the 11th hour as a political assassination, as always. That's what, of course, October surprises are. They're political assassinations. She was part of the Russian dossier from the beginning. We now know, this is beautiful, new information. 11 times from February of 2016, in direct accord with what we have told you here, the FBI paid Christopher Steele.
Well, let
11 times starting in February. It's a lie that Comey said that they never paid him that last installment for the December 13th installment on the Russian dossier. It looks as if they paid for every installment.
I just have to say now, Thomas, one of our commenters on YouTube, said that he was feeling rather smug these days because as even the alternative media is rolling out the stories, people have already heard this on our channel months ago.
We tend to stay, as you say, 6 to 8 months, sometimes years ahead.
Stephen Halper, Christopher Steele, Richard Dearlove, Jeffrey Patty, the Privy Council. And no matter what happens, that still is truth. And it's still going to be there. And we're still going to have to deal with it at some time.
Well, I've said from the beginning, what's her name? Nina Haskell, the new head of the CIA? Is that
Gina Haskell.
Gina Haskell. Okay, why do you think nothing has happened in the CIA? Why haven't you heard a single peep out of the CIA since she's become the head? Because he removed the fifth column. John Brennan was running the fifth column. He had hired, and through what's called the Joint Intelligence Committee, which is part of the Five Eyes agreement with us and Britain, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and us. What happened is that she knew full well what was going down. She was there. She was the CIA station chief in London at the time. So she saw all of that going down. So she's, of course, told Trump that. Trump knows that. He also knows that that's what's in the declassified documents. That Crossfire Hurricane, as Nunes has pointed out, had no intelligence. This was John Brennan basically working for Hillary Clinton's campaign with black ops. These are black ops. Who did they use? John Brennan went, first off, let's remember, John Brennan was the person who went to Russia to gather the information for the Russian dossier. Let's not forget that. He didn't even meet with his counterparts in Russia. He met with all these other people, which is unheard of. Why would the head of the CIA go to our biggest enemy? That's unheard of. They're not our enemy. So the whole idea they're our enemy, nonsense. John Brennan was in collusion with them from the beginning. So let's remember that. John Brennan couldn't wait for Comey and his pathetic attempts with Dianne Feinstein's Senate Intelligence Committee creating the Russian dossier very slowly with Christopher Steele and all the people you've mentioned. He was working directly for Halper, who was paid over $1 million, Stephen Halper, as a British agent. He may be American also, but he's also a Brit. So in this case, sorry, it's a crime. He's a foreign agent. And he's working to basically turn and work and frame domestic agents as well as basically frame anyone on the Trump team. So yes, the entire British intelligence was part of this because Robert Hannigan, the head of the General Communications Headquarters, which is basically the NSA of Britain, made an agreement with John Brennan, CIA, to use Admiral Rogers' NSA headquarters at Fort Meade, Maryland. Make the sign of the cross, all of you who are in NSA. To spy on the Trump towers.
Right, because y'all all are Jesuits over there in the NSA?
No, because you know that they're evil. Anytime you say NSA,
okay.
Everything they do is illegal. There's nothing they do that is... Do we have any named enemies besides terrorism? Has NSA stopped any terrorism? Has CIA, FBI, DOJ stopped any terrorism? No. Matter of fact, they're usually complicit with it. They've usually interviewed the people who are the terrorists and released them, finding them absolutely... innocent.
And so let's go back to Robert Hannigan, where I interrupted you.
Robert Hannigan set up a spy network out of Fort Meade, Maryland, as a connection to the Joint Intelligence Committee, or what they call the Five Eyes, which there is no Five Eyes. It's an agreement. And then each country has a committee, and it's usually ran by the CIA. That's why the CIA headquarters. So you can bet your bottom dollar that CIA head Haskell knew all about this. It was in the newspapers there all the time. They had taken George Papadopoulos as a useful idiot once he got into the Trump campaign by having one of his documents added as part of their foreign policy early presentation. He never met with Trump. He tried to tell people that he could get a connection with Russia, and they laughed at him. He believed he was having sex with Putin's niece. I think it's Michael Gaeta out of Italy, the CIA headquarters there. That's where he was set up with Joseph Mifsud, who also works out of a basically another CIA connection, a university there in Rome. And Joseph Mifsud, of course, has disappeared. And these people working through what's called Cambridge Intelligence Services, which has now been closed because they were caught so red-handed. This was in the newspaper. They made George Papadopoulos a hero who actually met with Boris Johnson. Believe this or not, folks, a complete useful idiot for the other side was set up. He was even given titles in organizations that were created so that they could give him a title in it. They entered him into a study group with Joseph Mifsud, who promised that he'd get to meet with Putin once a year, and that was what the group was about, that Mifsud, they say, was a Russian spy. No, he was not. He was a British spy. And then Alexander Downer from Australia was involved in this, and Andrew Wood. And what happened after all this spying and after the setup with Stephen Halper and all the British influence and just pathetically thick with trying to frame Carter Page and Sam Clovis, and oh my Lord, it's just disgusting. Robert Hannigan himself comes and oversees the wiretapping of Trump at Trump Towers. And then Admiral Rogers comes to Trump and tells him that because it happened in his building. And then Trump left Trump Towers and was no longer had his headquarters there because it was completely wiretapped. And wiretapped, physically wiretapped, not just surveillance on wireless phones. No, we're talking about physically wiretapped. They had the emails back and forth between Don Jr. and the setup with the Russian spy they allowed to come in, Natalia Veselnitskaya, and her gang, which met... Natalia Veselnitskaya met with Glenn Simpson before and after that meeting in Trump Tower with Don Jr. Folks, it is so thick that the foreign influence trying to stop Trump was as thick as it could possibly be. And that's what's coming out in the declassified documents. That's what Rodenstein has been covering up with the Mueller investigation, which they now literally say that the Mueller investigation is a continuation of John Brennan's Crossfire Hurricane, which was nothing more than giving Peter Strzok complete immunity from any crime he wanted to commit against America under the auspices of the national security. And then it merged with the FBI, and then it merged with the State Department and the DOJ and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So they were all in on it. And now they still want to make Strzok out to be an innocent guy.
Okay. Now, there are a lot of people out there that get overwhelmed by all these names, and I can understand why there's so many. And you just let them roll over you, like waves on a beach, to just let them roll over you. Because here's the bottom line, folks. This is what the important thing is. The United Kingdom government Privy Council members were trying to overthrow President Trump, and they use this big spy network to try to do this. And there are people in the United States that were working to assist them. Everyone from Hillary Clinton, Rod Rosenstein, Mueller. But basically, you're looking at people who are operatives of the Senior Executive Service, which is a form of control that the Brits have over the United States government. See, they've come and they've infiltrated our government with these people that are really running the show and obstructing justice. So it's okay that you don't know all the names that Thomas spews all the time, and they're important. The bottom line is, what we're going to find is that the Brits are not our friends. Again, we have warm feelings for our friends who are British citizens, but we need to dismantle this this government that spies on us. And, I wonder, once this is all uncovered, will this mean that we will put sanctions on Britain?
Yes, I wanted to bring that up in our very next talk. At this point, we have to consider the Brits our enemy.
Yeah.
Period. We have to put them on the same list with Iran and Syria and North Korea and Russia and China. And that means, unfortunately, Australia too, because they were involved in this, and Canada, because now we know that Intrust came out of Nortel. And
Intrust, you haven't mentioned here, is the company we've talked about in other audios.
The one that Hillary has her stooge, Jerry C. Jones, as the head of. And then that went over into the Axiom Company, which we had already found out Geoffrey Patty and Lord Malloch-Brown were connected through the British Privy Council with this company that seemed to have been where the Strategic Communications Laboratories, which was the mother company of Cambridge Analytica, which was so attacked in the last election because Trump Trump's guy, Parscale, who was his tech guy during the 2016 election, basically used some fourth-hand data from Cambridge Analytica, and that caused all the lies and accusations. And we pointed out that SCL, Limited, Strategic Communications Laboratory, actually received $76 million in 2016 to run the Global Engagement Center, which is where the fake Russia propaganda came from, which is probably where all of it came from, because they were paid to come in and do disinformation.
The United States government paid
in a special contract through the Global Engagement Center, which is part of the Department of Defense Board of Broadcasting Governors. They paid British-owned Strategic Communications Laboratories to run the Global Engagement Center, which was supposed to be stopping terrorists instead of creating terrorism against American electorate, against the American people in all these attacks. Because not only was Google changing the algorithms to put bad Hillary stuff down and good Hillary stuff up, and vice versa to Trump, but we have Facebook, where literally Hillary, when she was the Secretary of State, paid for an update to what they already had, which was a way to manipulate Facebook, which is it is a CIA psyops that is out of control. That's what Facebook is. But they paid Shevelenko, who was working in India at the time, a programmer, they paid with GSA money to write a template so Hillary would win, manipulating all social media. And that's what happened. But none of that has come to light. But what we have found out, none of that has it's come to light, but none of that has brought an indictment or prosecution against her. But we've also found out that Dianne Feinstein, who was principal, if not right there along with John McCain and Comey from the beginning in January of 2016, setting up this fake Russian dossier narrative, along with Christopher Steele and Henry Kerner and all the whole group there, Mark Warner and Richard Burr, they all were in communication with Christopher Steele. So that's the Brit. If the British connection goes down, here's what whoever called Trump was told on the phone by the Brits. It was probably the head now of their GCHQ, which Robert Hannigan stepped down from 3 days after Obama lost and Trump came to power, so that he could not be prosecuted for what he did, and so that they could later say he was rogue when he did it, which is nonsense. It went all the way up.
All right, well, tell us about this. How would you imagine this phone call went down?
The phone call was very simple. Let's say it's Theresa May. Dear Mr. President, we apologize for interfering in your election, but because we're part of the Five Eyes, you would destroy the entire Five Eyes community if you revealed what is in the justification for the FISA court warrant for the domestic Title I warrant for Carter Page. If you reveal that, if you declassify that, Mr. President, Five Eyes is compromised. Now, Mr. President, also...
Well, why would we even want to participate with this Five Eyes group that is trying to sabotage our government and our president?
Well, that's the whole point. She would try to use that as leverage, and really what he should say is, good, you give me false information and intelligence in Syria twice already. You always give me false intelligence. I don't need you. Get out. Matter of fact, take with you Serco, take with you Entrust, take with you the Crown agents and all the money you stole from OPEC and all the money you steal from USAID, and just get out. And as a matter of fact, take Lockheed with you, and take the U.S. Don't even get me started.
Can you imagine that, if that was Theresa May calling and she was saying, please, please, just as you said, and then POTUS said all of this in return? That would have to be a huge shock to her, because she probably doesn't even know all that.
No, she doesn't. And she's just, like so many politicians, they're just in it for themselves. So they're so selfish, they never pay attention to what's going on in the world. That's why you see an Al Green demanding Trump's impeachment, and he'll make up a crime later, though he and Gregory Meeks and Andre Carter, could anybody be any more corrupt? You want to know where the $17 million out of the Office of Compliance went? Well, I know where a whole lot of it went. It was to cover Al Green's sexual attacks on women on Capitol Hill. Everybody knows that. $750,000 a couple of years ago he paid out of his own account. Such standard operating procedure for him that he attacks anybody he wants, and then we, the taxpayers, pay for it, and they write non-disclosure agreements, which never get revealed, but of course Stormy Daniels' non-disclosure does, and Trump's non-disclosures do, and attorney-client privilege with Cohen gets swept under the rug or thrown into prison like Manafort. We are seeing the dismantling of the DOJ right in front of our eyes, and the FBI and CIA also.
Yes, but we need to be very careful because you had mentioned that a guy named Noel Francisco is his name, would be more than likely the next person in place to take over should Rod Rosenstein turn in his resignation. But Chris sent me his listing in the Plum Book. He's a senior executive operative as well. And just for the record, for those of you who keep asking me, yes, Brett Kavanaugh is also senior executive service. So we're watching now as these different players emerge. We're checking them out in the Plum Book.
You can bet your bottom dollar that any lawyer in the DOJ worth their salt is a SES member because they think they're above the pay rate of the Vice President of the United States of America. That's where they start, and then they demand above that, and then they get awards each year, and they get wonderful retirements for the rest of their life with medical and dental that is above anything anybody else gets. Don't you worry about those senior executive service members. They are the Democrats who are the bureaucratic status quo. They are professional administrators. They are the obstructionists. They stay in the jobs. Why? Because they believe that they're entitled to them. And what do? They don't take the same pay as the other people who do the same work. Oh, no. They're above them. They're in a paramilitary organization that has a union that literally no one but an SES member can attend or go to.
It's a new version of an army. They're a bureaucrat army, but they're doing as much harm to us as if we had an enemy at the border because they are destroying the country with their their obstruction and their ill will.
Let's go back to Kavanaugh for a second.
Okay, Kavanaugh.
We told you that Kavanaugh is a kangaroo court. It is a dog and pony show. Trump doesn't care what happens there. Haven't you noticed he doesn't really care? He keeps saying the same things he said from the beginning. Most qualified man in America. Most qualified man. Good man. Stand
nice family.
Nice family. He doesn't get into any of the dirt. He knew that Dianne Feinstein had this before he ever put the name up. Hello? And Dianne Feinstein, don't forget, you might as well say she controls the news. And she is a Chinese espionage agent. We now know that she even snuck behind the back of Hillary Clinton and made sure that China got a courtesy copy of all 780,000 emails that came through Hillary Clinton's server and John Podesta's and Huma's. And so China has a copy of all of them. Well, that means Dianne Feinstein has a copy of all of them. But she also has a copy of Dr. Blasey Ford's letter, which she is not revealing, which she's had since the summer, but only brought it at the 11th hour. We need to take this kind of political shenanigans, which are really political assassinations based upon CIA subversion tactics, which is simply perception management, and we need to put those people out to pasture, folks. We need to use our votes to get those people out. And when you name them, it's not a long list.
But you can't get them out when the election machine devices are rigged and they're changing the numbers through the cyber networks.
Which we've pointed out, and that goes back to Lord Malloch-Brown, and that goes back to Mitt Romney, and even Jeffrey Patty. But it goes back to Britain again, owning many of the machines, and ultimately, the rogue CIA owning the software that runs it, the OpTech. So it's not partisan, folks. It's the rogue CIA which is the home of the globalists, which basically works out of three places. So
sometimes people say it looks like we have a revolutionary war going on with Britain, and we also have a civil war in the United States among the left and the right. But really what we have, folks, is it's just the globalists. They are attacking us, and they are attacking us from the top down and the bottom up. And that's the old Saul Alinsky way to collapse a country. So we have really one big war. It isn't two. It's just two fronts.
Well, as you know, many conspiracy theorists say that there's three centers to the evil, and that is the Vatican. And as you see, they're going down on their own accord. Plus, we helped a lot. We pointed out who Francis was the moment that he came to power, and it has Got a lot of people to think about that. The City of London, nobody has done more to take down the City of London than the Americans for Innovation and Aim for Truth, Truth News Headlines. Nobody. No one has revealed the true workings of the City of London until now, and the way that goes to the British Privy Council, the Queen's group of 500 people. And then, of course, the third headquarters of evil, according to these people, is Washington, D.C. Now, I would beg to differ on that. It's Washington, D.C. and New York City. They're one and the same. They're actually one city. And they have a third city that is their propaganda arm, and that is Hollywood. But Hollywood is controlled by the same people who control the mainstream media. Don't forget that. 6 companies control practically everything that you see that you think is information, unless you got it off the internet from alternative news and citizens journalists, or that you do your own research and you go to the indictable evidence, which is available if you're a good researcher, and pull that information out yourself. So what we have is Dianne Feinstein was in the Senate Intelligence Committee. She quit after she revealed Glenn Simpson's behind closed door testimony. In other words, after she made sure that the lie that he told would be the lie that everyone who worked with him told. And then she went over to the Judiciary Committee and started working there diligently to make sure that no Supreme Court justice is elected that he puts up. So what did she do? Oh, does anyone realize that Dr. Blasey Ford is at Stanford? And what does she teach there? The introduction to people who are interested in becoming CIA agents. She is the CIA's agent in that university, which we know is the number one place in America where people are recruited to work for the CIA. And then she comes out and then has to delay, and she can't remember what year it happened in, or the date, or where. And Dianne Feinstein, through Avid and ISIS management, through the mainstream media, gets this played as if this woman needs to be heard at the 11th hour. This is the way that it works, folks. This is called the tail that wags the dog.
Now, another thing happening this week is President Trump is in New York City getting ready. Well, he actually had his first speaking engagement today at the UN, and then his speech will be forthcoming.
And notice that Rat Rodenstein went to the White House while Trump was gone.
Well, that's usually when rats come out, when the master's away.
And then Rat Rodenstein will only come see Trump when?
Well, he's coming Thursday.
Oh, and what else happens on Thursday?
Yeah.
Dr. Ford comes and cries, demands that a man stand up and defend himself against accusations he's never seen. Remember, no one's seen this letter of hers. And so they want Kavanaugh to defend himself and then sit down and shut up and never speak again, while she stands up after, 2 weeks or 2 months of CIA Hollywood training so that she can cry upon response and so she can pass. Remember, that some say, and this is unbelievable, that she came into this having passed a polygraph test saying that what she said was true. Who gave her that polygraph test? Did she do that at her university, at the CIA agent recruiting office? Okay, this is how, and now, of course, people are pouring out who say that Kavanaugh sexually assaulted them. We told you from the beginning, this was going to bring out the ugliness of the Republicans and the Democrats, right? And it has. And what are we seeing? We don't care if Brett Kavanaugh gets elected. He already is the idiot who wrote a 125-page statement that says a president doesn't have to commit a crime to be impeached.
Yes, and it's very disturbing.
He's the worst person for the job. Trump
but the swamp doesn't want him because now they fully get it about the military tribunals.
You see, the swamp thinks the Democrats are going to win in the midterm, which they're not, and that they'll be able to, that Gregory Meeks will stand up again and put the articles of impeachment up, one of the most criminal people up there at Capitol Hill, and that they'll get that through a blue house. No, it won't be a blue house, and they won't get it through. And even if they did, even if it went to the Supreme Court, they don't have the votes to get through the Senate. It's stupid to talk impeachment now, and anyone with a brain knows that, but that's the kind of thing they just did to Kavanaugh. That's called a CIA regime change, or a hit, or an election manipulation. They call it meddling in the election, as if meddling isn't a crime. It's what you do because opposition research is okay. Falsehood politics is the name of the game. No, it's evil. So Trump is in New York. Rod Rosenstein comes over, and the lie comes through Axios that he tells Kelly that he's going to resign because he assumes he's going to be fired. No, that's probably all lies. Here's what's going on. Trump went to UN to pronounce them dead. The United Nations has been dead since Trump came to power 2 years ago. He immediately stopped. So much money flowing to them, and we are the UN. Those other nations are there as vampires to suck off of us. None of them pay their bills, but they sit on a Security Council that can veto America, who pays the bills. Trump knows this. It was one of the first things on our list that we asked Trump to do is get rid of the UN, but get rid of everything. So what has he done? Here's what he's done. UNESCO. You give out sterilizations, UNESCO, in your shots to Africans that is paid for by Bill Gates. And Bill Gates said that he was proud that that program would kill 17% of the Africans. That's what UNESCO does. UNESCO also does what? It promotes abortions. They will actually give you every pill that has been proven or not proven to be safe to any African to stop a birth before, during, or after that conception. They want to kill all the Africans. Now, they'd be pleased with 2/3. That's Bill Gates. He's come out publicly along with Oprah and his father, who was the head of, he was the lawyer representing Planned Parenthood. Now, don't forget, these are murderers. These are eugenists. They call it a nice name. They call it eugenics. That is murder. That means kill them before they even get born. And these are the people who support Planned Parenthood, who, don't forget, spent $50 million of U.S. taxpayer dollars to support their candidates in this midterm election, all Democrats. Okay? So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing here with UNESCO. Oh, let's go to the next one. What is the number one business of the United Nations? The UN High Council on Refugees. And normally the person who's the head of that is usually considered to be the next head of the UN, which is what happened with Guterres. Well, he is a criminal, and he's killed more people than I can shake a stick at. 800,000 died in the first bombings in Syria, which is what he told President Bashar al-Assad. If he did not get 800,000 people to become refugees and go to Turkey, he couldn't give him any money for refugees. Once he did that, he gave him over $4 billion in support. And then the Arabs, let us call them radical Islamic terrorists, gave him another, well, let's not consider them so bad, seeing that they gave hidden billions, about 10 billion. But then the European Union, they gave the balance of that money for 11.5 billion, so that Syria made more money in the last few years than they ever made when all of their pipelines worked and their entire country was at peace. In other words, it's a money-making deal, folks. And what does it do? It provides oil to Israel. Now, I know you're going to think that's crazy, but go back and look at the pictures that Putin provided that showed that the oil simply was piped through pipelines that were never attacked by America, Syria, Russia, or any of the rebel factions, all 5 of them, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, whoever, al-Nusra. No one ever bombed the oil pipelines. And where did the oil pipelines go? To ships that went to Israel and to trucks that went back to Turkey. So it is a money-making deal. You always have to look at the money and follow the money. So Trump is going to say to the UN, I don't care what your Security Council says. Why do you think Nikki Haley is such a, what word should I use? Aggressive person in the United Nations and absolutely rips their heads off and tells them all to go jump in the lake? Because Trump has defunded them. He's defunded them more than I have even been able to keep track, because there has been many secret defundings. The World Trade Organization is being dismembered, and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is being basically given no attention because it no longer controls the world's currencies. And it's simply used as a trick, and Trump used it as a trick to bring China into looking like the IMF, bringing Russia into looking like the IMF and wanting to work with the World Trade Bank. Once he manipulates China and Russia by, first off, putting sanctions on China and dropping all the tariffs so that we have no trade barriers, and then taking the sanctions off of Russia, there'll be no need for the World Bank, there'll be no need for the International Monetary Fund and the reserve currency that they use, which is nothing more than a scam to support Washington, D.C. Okay, what else has he defunded? He's defunded the Blue Hats. He's defunded the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations. Why?
Because they're troublemakers and they run these false flags.
And they've raped more people than any other army on the face of the earth. That's what they do. They're rapists.
People don't know about this because you don't have a truthful media to report it.
But it's all been reported. Rwanda was fake. They stood there and watched it. All the actions where they go to protect corporations. They do not go to protect nations. And show me anything. I swear to you, please, anyone out there, show me any good thing the United Nations has ever done.
Well, how about OPIC and USAID? Are they included in these defundings?
No, those are separate. OPEC is a private corporation which Trump just completely gutted with a blink of an eye. No one's even mentioned it. USAID, he pulled all the money back from USAID and is not letting it be the discretion of the Secretary of State because Hillary abused it so bad it has to be completely reworked. So all of the USAID money has to go through many new avenues that include the president before it's given out. So it isn't given out to Hillary's friends anymore as ways to buy weapons from her as a weapons trader. Don't forget, she made weapons off those Stinger missiles she sold that went from Africa to Syria. She is a drug, not only a drug dealer. She made
weapons off of them. You mean she made money off of them?
She made money off the weapons. We saw the contracts. She made $100,000, and that's why Stevens was killed in Benghazi.
Right.
So when you want to look back, folks, you got to go back to where the money flowed. You got to see the real documents. You have to see the markings on those Stinger missiles that were found in Syria. You have to trace them back and see where they went, and then you have to see who purchased them and where they went, and then you can find these things out. So United Nations needs to be closed, and the building...
It needs to be demolished.
Exactly.
And you can easily do it because it's probably filled with asbestos and is as much a hazard as the Twin Towers were when they had that excuse to collapse them.
History lesson, please. Woodrow Wilson, one of the worst presidents,
yes,
he would be probably second next to Barack Obama, started a group called the Inquiry, which became the Council on Foreign Relations, which controlled our country and still controls it now with its foreign policy. It was the basis that took over when the League of Nations couldn't be voted into place because pathetic Woodrow Wilson went to the Treaty of Versailles and didn't sign it, couldn't get America to sign that treaty, did secret deals. The Sykes-Picot still to this day controls the Levant. It still controls what happens in Israel. It still controls the War of Armageddon to this day. That was Woodrow Wilson, folks. He created the League of Nations, but we didn't join it. And then it turned into the United Nations, and we secretly joined it at the same time that we started the IRS, taxing Americans, the U.S. Federal Reserve, all about the same time, within a few years, these things were created.
These are the globalists moving in.
It's the globalists, the Council on Foreign Relations, it all moved in, and then later you have the Russian spy who created the Bretton Woods Agreement, which then controlled all the banks and the brokers, and that needs to be changed too. But all those things, easy to change. Look at UN. By the way, I have to spout this. Please let me spout this. Barack Obama signed 5 UN treaties, none of which were ratified by our Congress. He still acted on all of them through his 8 years. The Small Arms Treaty, that's the reason for the false flags, folks. Those false flags were legal. He changed the National Defense Authorization Act to make false flags for his administrative policy of getting guns out of people's hands legal. Those false flags, many of them were not what they were said to be. Okay, what was the other one? Strong cities. Do you remember the Jade Helm 2015? He used that as cover to bring in UN high-powered, full-on, full-scale military equipment.
Who didn't see them running down the roads?
They were everywhere. And they were all UN. Look, they were painted UN. They didn't have numbers on them. And they went to every city. And now when you see any serious false flag, you will see those heavy armored vehicles show up. That was called the Strong Arms City Initiative.
Okay, what other ones?
Well, the ones about the future. Everything about the future that he signed, all of those promises, the Climate Accord. There were dozens of UN agreements that he signed.
Well, he needs to eventually,
They were all bad.
as we find out, his direct involvement in helping the British overthrow the American government, he will be stripped of his presidency.
He has no legacy except lawlessness. The UN Refugee Council, tough luck. We were taking anyone they sent us unvetted. Here's what happens. You leave Syria, you're a fighting soldier, you're Al-Qaeda, you're al-Nusra, you're ISIS, doesn't matter. You go over, you get free food, free everything. You wait until the boats come, you force the women and children back, you get on those boats, you use a fake name. By the way, the Pope takes your name, and it's the same name that thousands of people use because you don't have any ID. The Pope gets paid for every one of you while you're there. He splits it with Turkey and with Syria, and then that's how the number one greatest amount of money comes to the Pope, is through the refugees. Okay, that's why he says open borders, and that's why he kisses the feet of migrants. So you're this ISIS person. You come basically on US dollars under a fake name given to the UN from the Pope. And then the UN, without ever seeing you, without ever looking at you, without ever checking you or vetting you, sends you to one of 184 fake, most of them fake, and say they're either Lutheran or Catholic organizations that disperse those refugees in America. We have looked for those refugees recently. The last 1,500 they looked for, they found 11. That's recently, folks. When they looked for the 100,000 that Barack Obama came in, they found 2 families. They're being human trafficked, just like when Barack Obama.
They get the bang for the buck then, because you're not only getting money for them to take care of them as refugees, but then you're using organs and other nefarious things, slave labor, and you're monetizing it. Again, you're monetizing human beings at different levels.
50,000 young people came when Obama crawled out to them and said, have your parents bring you to the border of America. If you're an unaccompanied minor, I'm going to take care of you. He put them in planes and buses, and he shipped them everywhere, and none of them can be found. 50,000 of them. We know where some of them were found. They were found in poultry workhouses and horrible places where they were being used as slave labor, okay? So that's who Barack Obama was. Okay, that's what the UN Refugee Council does. And the head of the UN, he knew all of that. And so what did Trump do? He stopped it completely. Stopped it completely. Now we're vetting all of them. We know where they're at. And they're Christians. They're not just radical Islamic terrorists, which is what all of the ones that Barack Obama brought. And he made sure they only came in from the countries that he had bombed. Though earlier, just years before that, he had written the same executive order Trump did that said that he disallowed anyone coming from those countries to come into this country. Later, he only allowed those countries to come in as refugees. So, Betsy, when we want to look at a Washington, D.C. update, it gets me all worked up because we're not within certain parameters, and I just go out there because when you follow these things to their end conclusion, the evil is the same old rat lines as always, the same 7 deadly sin paths to hell as you'd find that any idiot would follow. It's not hard to figure it out, and it's not hard to stop it. So I want to say to everyone, this is beautiful what's happening with Rosenstein. By the way, don't believe a word he says ever. And it's beautiful what's happening with the declassification. It's beautiful what Nunes and the others are doing to bring these things forward and all the investigations. We don't want Kavanaugh, and we don't care. If Kavanaugh gets in, he's going to kiss Trump's foot. If he doesn't get in, so what? It will show the evil of both sides who aren't MAGA before the midterm, shows exactly who they are. It sunk the career of Cory Booker. It sunk the career of Kamala Harris. It sunk Dianne Feinstein's career. It sunk many people's career. That's because some of them have everything at stake because they're the guilty parties. And who's guiltiest of all? Sorry, it's the Brits. And does the Queen have something to worry about? I'm sorry, we don't believe you. We know that your Privy Council works as the ultimate committee that runs not only Britain and the United Kingdom, but unfortunately also has its tentacles through America. And we are going to stop you because we found your rat lines and we're going to stop the rats like Rat Rodenstein and his whole gang.